Okay, and good morning and welcome. So welcome to Walk the Talk, our version of a podcast where you walk if you want to, while we do the talking. So yeah, we don't want to be adding to your virtual fatigue at the moment. So if you're up for it, plug in your earphones and listen while you take us on a walk, even if it's just around the home. So my name is Sarah and I'm one of the co-founders and trainers at Point 3 Wellbeing, and I'll be hosting today's panel discussion. The next in our Walk the Talk series aimed at HR professionals and business leaders and anyone interested in the mental health and well-being of people in the workplace. And I'm delighted today to be joined by our panel of diverse speakers representing the NHS, HR, senior leadership, and the employee. So before I introduce Megan, Rosie, John, and Marcus officially, I just want to set a bit of the scene for today's conversation. So the pandemic has presented organisations and individuals with an opportunity to rethink and to reimagine the way that we work. And from an employee perspective, the pandemic has also led to what's known as the Great Resignation, a global trend of employees voluntarily leaving their jobs from spring earlier this year up until the present day in response to the pandemic, and for a number of reasons. So the pandemic has allowed workers to rethink their careers, to rethink work conditions and long-term goals. And workers are now desiring more freedom to work from home and greater flexibility. And this exodus is being driven by millennials and Gen Z, who are more likely to be dissatisfied with their work and looking to gain greater work-life balance. And those industries that have been hit the hardest are those that require in-person interactions. So from an employer's perspective, this is, of course, a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to respond and to stay competitive. So firstly, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, their role and their experience and perspective when it comes to mental health and well-being of people in the workplace and why it's important to them. So first up, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Megan Swanson. Megan, welcome. Please do introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you, Sarah. I'm Dr. Megan Swanson. I'm a clinical and sports psychologist. I'm currently working with the West London NHS on a team for adults with learning disabilities and comorbid mental health concerns. I'm also a psychology professor for a university in the US. I work with patients in a very systemic way. So I work with their families, carers, schools, colleges, and other professionals, as well as patients themselves. And doing this has really allowed me to see how individuals work through the same situation, but experience it differently. And it's helped me to develop ways to not just help the patient themselves, but also those who support them, which I think is a really interesting way of looking at it through the workplace lens, because it's very similar. People go through the same thing, but experience it differently. And I found that at the same pace working with university students, where working purely remotely, I've had to have my finger on the pulse of resources available where the students physically are to ensure their safety and success when I can't be physically there with them. So for me, well-being in the workplace is critical to overall well-being because it's where we spend the majority of our time. It's where our brain often wanders, even when we aren't actually there. So creating like a well-work environment and a place where individuals feel safe to practice well-being makes for a happier and healthier workplace and has a really massive trickle-down effect in terms of overall mental health and wellness for individuals when they leave work as well.
Thank you and welcome, Megan. We look forward to hearing from you throughout the webinar. Okay, and now handing over to you, John. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So yeah, John Meeks, head of supply chain at Willmott Dixon Interiors. For those of you who don't know, Willmott Dixon, a construction group, predominantly operating throughout the UK, and I work for the interiors division out of London. Mental health in our business has probably been something we've really taken seriously over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's probably had a bit of a stigma in the construction industry. I think the industry generally lags behind many others. And therefore, I think at our business, we realised that whilst we had a duty, to deliver mental health training and create a better environment for our own people, we also did actually on our building sites more so, where we've got such a wide variety of people working on those jobs. And what we've really noticed is that whilst mental health is important, it's even more important that you create the right environment to discuss it in, and you respect other people's opinions. You respect their backgrounds and their beliefs, and we've actually probably invested more time in listening to people and giving people that time to feel like they can be comfortable in whatever environment they're working in. So whilst we've done a lot of work internally, that's been important. Actually, the biggest change for me has been how our scaffolders, carpenters, bricklayers actually deal with mental health as well. So it's been really interesting, and I think our industry has come on leaps and bounds over the last few years in terms of not making it a stigma anymore and being open to discuss these things.
Thank you, John, and welcome. And moving now on to Rosie, please.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name's Rosie Morgan. I work as an employee experience manager at Dazn. For anyone who doesn't know, Dazn is a sports streaming company, and we have rights all over the world with employees based globally as well. So I've been an employee experience manager for about a year or so, with a background in internal comms before that. And my focus really has been on wellbeing for the last year and a half, I suppose, and really looking at the challenges of how we support our demographics across the business in different countries, those cultural connotations that come with that, but also our different groups within the business. We have different functions from the tech company, the ops, the lots of different teams and functions who have different needs that we need to support differently. So been looking at that really for the last year and a half.
Thank you. Welcome, Rosie. We look forward to hearing from you. And last but by no means least, Marcus, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Marcus Pfeiffer-Key. I'm a marketing specialist, and I've worked in various marketing and advertising agencies, from startups to global organizations, over the past 13 years. And 4 years ago, after a difficult time personally and professionally, I was subsequently signed off work with stress, anxiety, and low mood, which led to me being away from my current work, my work then, for 4 months. And since then, I've had a few more smaller breaks from work. But that moment 4 years ago was really a turning point for me, I guess, in getting the treatment that I needed and coming to terms with my diagnosis, and also becoming confident in talking about my mental health more openly at work, to allow for reasonable adjustments and the things that can help enhance the environment for people like me. I'm now a trained mental health first aider. So hopefully today I can give an employee's perspective really to this, someone on the inside who has experienced various different organizations, and the differences in how they may have managed the situation. I've been very fortunate with how all of the organizations I've worked with have behaved as and when the need has arisen, but it shouldn't come down to luck, really, because I've spoken to other friends and other colleagues who haven't been so lucky and haven't really had the experience that I've had, that have allowed me to kind of take the time I need to build my confidence, understand myself better, and bring my best self to work. So hopefully I can give the employees perspective, and also think about how businesses and employers can help build environments that allow people to bring their best selves to work.
Thank you, Marcus, and welcome. Yes, a very important perspective, and thank you for your generosity in sharing and joining us today. Okay, so on to the conversation, and to reference some some data. Gallup's most recent global emotions report says that more people have reported feeling stressed, angry, sad, and worried in 2020 than at any point in Gallup's global tracking. And it went on to say that whilst this did peak in 2020, this trend actually started more than 10 years ago. So it can't be blamed on the pandemic alone. Megan, coming to you first, I wonder if you have any kind of data from the National Health Service that backs up this survey. And if you wouldn't mind sharing your perspective as to whether or not you relate to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this one's really interesting because I think we've been seeing over the past several years a real increase in our wait lists, people coming back for treatment again. So typically when we treat a patient, it's over a short term, so 6 to 12 weeks, 6 to 12 sessions, depending on their needs. And I think there is this perception that there's a massive peak in this last 2 years of COVID and the changes and adaptations that we've had to make. But I think the reality is really what we've seen beyond all this is a massive push to look at mental health more holistically. So we're looking at it in our homes and in our places of work. We're fundamentally much more aware than we were in 2019, that we're all more susceptible to mental health concerns, and that those perhaps existed years before COVID, before the spotlight was put on them. So while it's not surprising, I do think what it's done is made us really look at what's been happening and take pause to try and better understand why it's been happening over this past decade and see what we can do to provide tools to help individuals adapt to our ever-changing world, because what we've seen is it will continue to change. We don't have concrete answers as to what's next. For my team, we've been utilizing a lot more outcomes to look at consistency and see how we're working, what modalities are working best, what's the most effective, what timelines are best for our populations, and really keeping an eye on our wait list. So that might mean that we're hiring more people, which we're constantly doing. And I've seen a lot of that over the past year. We're really constantly short-staffed because of the higher needs, but we're also getting extremely high amounts of referrals. And they're coming from more places than they used to come. So within the NHS, you can be referred from a parent, a sister, a GP, anyone, but typically they would come from a GP. And now we're seeing a lot more of them coming from schools, family members, friends, GPs, even people who are asking to be self-referred. So I would say, while it is surprising, it's also just a real heightened awareness that has been created over the past couple of years.
Thank you. And coming to you, Marcus, if I may, as someone who has been diagnosed with a mental health condition in the past, how do you relate to this data?
I think, talking specifically about the report, it doesn't surprise me. I think, speaking more broadly, it feels like we're living in a bit of a juxtaposition at the moment where we're more connected than we've ever been, but also further apart. And I think the report points to some really big challenging issues like, income inequality and rising corruption and lack of freedom, which are significant and big problems to solve. And I think whilst not directly attributed in the report, this 10-year trend probably closely maps the rise of digital technology, smartphones, social media. And to try and bring this back to the workplace, I think all this connection is making it harder and harder for, speaking specifically, for me to disconnect from work. The working day doesn't end when you leave the office anymore, and often we're being asked to do more with less. So I think pressure is increasing, and that's something that I found challenging. And it's becoming harder to set clear boundaries between work and home. And the pandemic likely exacerbated that. Home became the office. So those boundaries were completely disrupted if you were working from home. We also lost that physical connection with our place of work and with the people we work with. And whilst Zoom is fantastic and it's brilliant to see faces, it can't really replace that human interaction you get when you're all in a room together or in a meeting together. And obviously job insecurity was huge during the pandemic. So, the report doesn't surprise me. I think that trend can be probably put down to various reasons. But I'd like to think there are some small but impactful steps we can take to help right the ship, so to speak.
Well, that leads very nicely on to the next question. Thank you. The report obviously suggests that we're living with and dealing with more stress than ever before. And in fact, it is International Stress Awareness Week this week as well. So to that point, what can employees, I'll come back to you first, Marcus, what can employees do to support themselves better?
So thinking about both employers and employees, I think, in any relationship, responsibility for balance lies with both parties, and it all starts with communication. So, talking openly about how I was feeling at work was the first step for me then getting the help that I needed. It also opened up conversations and gave maybe people confidence who hadn't spoken about those things before to talk and go through a similar path that I followed. That support and treatment then allowed me to understand the triggers at work that impacted my mental health. And then I could work with my employer to make reasonable adjustments and set boundaries and help minimize the need for me to take time away from work. So I think there are three things I would say. First and foremost, it sounds simple, but it can be very difficult. But talk, don't be afraid. You'll be surprised what opening up does, not only for you, but also for those who may not have found the confidence to do so yet. Think about, potentially do some self-reflection and think about the moments in which you might have found yourself struggling with your mental health and what those triggers may have been. And once you understand that, you can then have a more open conversation with your organization about the boundaries maybe that you might need around your work and work-life balance to help you thrive.
Thank you. And coming to you, Rosie, if I may, from the employer's perspective, what can employers do and what are you seeing good success with in terms of supporting your employees better?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, I think as an employer, you have the duty of care towards employees, which is the legal obligation to provide a safe working environment for your employees. But where I think companies can tend to go a little further and do a little more is by looking at that company culture. Because I think people often underestimate the power that a company culture has. And a good example of that, to give a concrete example, is a lunch break. We all have lunch breaks written into our contracts as an employee, but if your company culture is to work through your lunch break, your employees will be getting emails, they'll be getting tasks with deadlines that they have to work through their lunch breaks in order to achieve, and they might see their boss working through lunch breaks. And so it doesn't give them that permission or that feeling that they're comfortable to actually go and have that time for themselves. So I think if you are an employer, stopping to have a look at behaviours across the business that either support well-being or are detrimental to well-being, and seeing what you can do to change and alter those things, I think are really valuable to driving change and to making it a better working environment for people to be able to look after themselves. And I think, as Marcus said, it's really nice to have that balance of responsibility, both from the employer's point of view to make it a supportive working environment, but then also at the end of the day, I can't personally go knocking on everyone's doors to make sure that they're taking their lunch breaks. So at some point, it obviously, of course, is up to the individual to take that action and to engage with activity that the employer is putting on. But I think it is amazing to see how much an employer can do in order to make it comfortable and possible for people to look after their well-being.
Thank you. And John, do you have anything from your perspective to add to this question?
Yeah, I thought Rosie's points were really good, actually, and I agree with everything she said there. I think the only thing I'd add to that is that as employers, we're actually leaders, and it's your behaviours that reflect on the people that you work with and who work for you. And I think, vulnerability plays a massive part in that. If you're prepared to be vulnerable in front of the people that you lead, that you manage, then that shows to them that they can be vulnerable too. It's all well and good saying, you want to discuss mental health and you want to create an environment where people can talk openly, but that comes from the person saying it. And I think in our business, it's probably been the most important thing, that actually that culture of being open in terms of how you're feeling, and perhaps some of the mental health issues that you've got going on, start with me. And if I'm not doing that, then it doesn't hold a lot of substance. So that's I think the only thing I'd add. I think that the culture and behaviours are really, really important. I'm sort of glad that Rosie mentioned that, because the behaviour especially is, you need that respect culture there. You need to respect what someone's saying to you. And that's what I would add to that, Sarah.
Yeah, so it very much starts from the top, leading by example. Okay, thank you. So whilst Gallup, they reported this sort of upward trend in negative emotions over the past 10 years. The pandemic has also led to the Great Resignation, which I've already referenced, with more people seeking greater flexibility and greater work-life balance. So yes, this is a challenge, I'm sure, for employers, but it also represents an opportunity. How are your various sort of organisations kind of responding to this? I'll come back to you, John, if I may, first.
Yeah, sure. So I think before COVID, and it's a shame that COVID has to have such an anchor in the conversations that we have nowadays, but it was such a massive cultural change in the way that we ran our lives, and that you can't escape it. And I'm sure we won't for a long time to come. I think there was a lot of companies flirting with the idea of giving people more flexibility and better empowerment. I think probably Virgin, a good example of that, where you could book as much holiday as you wanted throughout the year, and that was there to sort of give people a bit more control. And I think what COVID's done for us in our industry, which is very much, if you're not seen on site, you're clearly not doing anything kind of opinion on the people at work, was that actually it brought that trust in, and actually working at home meant that you were far more efficient, that you enjoyed work a bit more, so you committed yourself a little bit better, and you could be trusted to, whilst you got a contract of X amount of hours, you could be trusted to fulfill them in the best way that you thought you could. And for me, whilst COVID has been obviously a terrible sequence of events over the last almost 2 years, there's so much good that's come out of it. And I think actually the good that's come out of it is pretty much what we're talking about today, because it's put a lot of things under the spotlight. So in terms of that sort of Great Resignation, and sort of what people have realised is that actually it's reinvigorated the workplace, and it's allowed businesses to work a little bit more flexibly, a little bit more with a little bit more agility. And I think people feel actually more trusted at work now, more so than they ever have done. I certainly do, and I know that people in our industry have. So that's kind of how it's affected our business, and I'm very keen to keep it positive, because I genuinely think it has been.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. And coming to you now, Rosie, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think all of that completely back everything that John set up. Is really true. I think what's really interesting is to think about why people might be moving. And of course, there are many reasons why people might be leaving their jobs at the moment, but two theories that really stand out for me are it was a bit of a natural circuit breaker. As John said, it really stopped people in their tracks. It made people reflect and reevaluate, maybe reassess what they were doing. And, people's priorities might have changed, or their circumstances might have changed. So I think we've got a general big life moment that's caused people to have a bit of a rethink, have a bit of a a reevaluation of what they want out of lives. So I think that was quite a natural pause. But then also this sense of powerlessness that was created as a result of the pandemic. Suddenly there were a lot of restrictions on our lives. You had to stay at home more. You could only leave the house to exercise once a day. I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact that had on people. And suddenly it created this lack of control over your everyday experiences. But what we could still control was where we lived and where we worked. So if people really wanted to put themselves back in the driving seat, I think it's a really interesting theory that people looked at both where they worked and where they lived and looked to change at least maybe one or both of those things. So those are sort of some interesting theories as to why people might be leaving their jobs. Then as an employer, what do you do about it? How do you support people who might be experiencing that? Well, we've done quite a lot of different things, but some highlights that I thought might be interesting to support existing talent in the business is we've been really highlighting internal vacancies. So if people are looking for fresh starts or they are looking to have a change of direction, we've been highlighting ways that they can do it within the company. And I think it's a bit of a win-win, because for employees, it means they get a new challenge, a new start without having to uproot from the company. And obviously for the business, it means that you get to retain great talent. So internal vacancies is something that we have been trying to highlight more for employees recently. Another one, of course, is flexible working hours, enabling people to determine as and when they operate and carry out their workload whilst juggling other commitments. And another one to try and give people more control is our return to the office framework, which we have gone, as it sounds like from the polls at the beginning, lots of other people have as well, a hybrid working model. And that just enables people to choose, make that choice at a team level when they go in, how often they go in, and really gives that sort of feeling of self-determination, as it were, to people to make that choice for themselves, because people are capable of it. So it's been really nice to offer that to people and hopefully, make Dazn a great place to work for our existing talent. Again, as you mentioned, though, it does produce opportunity to get new talent through the door as well, and fresh perspectives. And what we've been trying to do, again, amongst other things, to try and make Dazn as an attractive an employer as possible, is looking at the wellbeing side of things. And we know it's important to our candidates, because it's the first question they ask in almost every single interview is, what is your wellbeing offering? And so that's why it's been a particular pleasure for me, because it's a big passion of mine, mental health and wellbeing, to work on it solidly for the last year and a half, really, and building out our offering as a company to make sure that it's good enough to have something in there that will support everyone. Another element we've looked at is onboarding. Obviously, more people are being onboarded in a remote environment, so making sure that process is up to speed and able to support people, and it's able to get people connected to the business as quickly as possible. And another one is online communities. Our partners at Our Mind have some really interesting data around connection, how it's been really dropping off during the course of the pandemic, people feeling connected to colleagues and to something bigger. So we've been looking at building online communities around interests and passions and locations, etc., so that people still have a platform where they can interact socially with their colleagues. So yeah.
That's brilliant, Rosie. And there is a question that has come from the audience about that, which I will come back to you on that specifically later. Okay, so moving on to the next question, which is all around sort of how integral kind of mental health and well-being is, in terms of your kind of strategy for building your employer brand, to build on everything you've just said there, Rosie, to retain and attract talent. Can you build out a little bit more from the employee experience side of things?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the fact we even have an employee experience team goes to show how much of a priority it is. And to go back to Marcus's point, I think it was that, that there is a lot of good that has come out of the pandemic, is that triggered a real need. People recognized that we needed to address well-being in the workplace. We needed to make it a priority. So the fact that we have a team that's dedicated towards looking at company culture, and promoting well-being just goes to show how much of a priority it is for us. And that's really thanks to senior leaders who've enabled us to form a team and to really focus on it. We started out just with a SharePoint site. It was the dullest thing ever. It was just a little SharePoint site, and we published an internet article on it every now and again about how people can look after themselves and their well-being. And that was sort of a year and a half ago. And now we've really grown it into having lots of different activities across the business. I've sort of bucketed them out to hopefully not bombard with too much information, but essentially we have an activity bucket where we have regular activity happening all the time. So we have a weekly meditation class that people can dial into. We have a weekly HIIT exercise class. We have a monthly brown bag where we get a wellbeing expert in to come and talk about a particular wellbeing topic. And amongst other things, that's just regular activity that becomes run of the mill and keeps wellbeing on people's minds and shows that how much of a priority it is at the business. Then we have our sort of our wellbeing infrastructure, which is looking at employee assistance programs. It's our partnership with Our Mind, a workplace mental health support app, setting up a mental health first aiders network. It's providing all of those layers of support that's on demand for our employees as and when they need it. And then the last bucket is sort of, I struggled to define this one, but it's sort of our ways of working. And what we've done is we've launched a couple of internal initiatives to try and make sure that those behaviors within the company are taking well-being into account. So for example, we have no meeting days to give people that breathing space to get on top of their to-do lists and focus on their own priorities. We've done recharge lunchtime, sort of short videos with our leadership teams, showing them, giving people that visibility of people taking breaks and trying to make that as okay and comfortable as possible for people. So lots of different activities there, with the activity, the infrastructure, and those ways of working that try and gear the company culture to being as supportive as possible for people prioritizing their well-being and making Dazn a great place to work, really.
Wonderful. Yeah, lots of great ideas there. Coming to you, John, how integral is mental health and well-being in terms of the strategy of building your employer brand to retain and attract talent?
Yeah, very much so. It's probably at the forefront of how we try and attract people into our business, actually. And it is a bit of a battle at the minute. There are massive shortages in our industry, especially. So it's about trying to work out what you can do differently to attract the right talent in. And I think culture, we've talked about it a lot, plays a massive part of that. Obviously money is important, but how a business feels, how people act and behave within it is just important for us as a business. And we've done quite a lot in terms of trying to change that brand. So at the minute, we've got something called CORE, which is courage, openness, and respect, which sort of sits behind the way we do things around our business. We've invested quite a lot in mental health first aid training. I'm one of them. Most of the senior managers are. We've been obviously using Point 3 to do some training to a lot of our people as well. We have a psychologist that we use, a chap called Philip Cook, who all the senior managers spend a day with every 6 months. And for anyone that's watched Billions, he's kind of our Wendy Rhodes, if you will. What it means is we create an environment where we shut the door, we keep everything in the room, and we just discuss what the last 6 months have been like in terms of how it's felt for us, the challenges that we face as people, and trying to be as vulnerable as we possibly can. And I suppose that the teachings from Brené Brown have probably played a massive role in that. And I come back to the vulnerability piece again. What that means is actually I'm really close now to the other senior managers in the business. I know things about them that a lot of people don't. And because I know that about them, I feel like I'm not scared to go and talk to them. And we've tried to put that throughout the business, that there shouldn't be anything that you shouldn't let anything leave the room unsaid. And in our meetings now, we've kind of got into we always do check-ins. We always ask how people are. We always ask if there's anything in the room that might cause an issue. So they're there at the beginning, so everyone kind of knows what everyone's world looks like. And it's important that you're invited into that world in our business. And I think for me, that's probably been the biggest change. We've obviously put, our packages are really good in terms of what we offer in terms of mental health experts and people who are suffering from different bits and pieces. We've got plenty of that going on in the background. And I think a lot of big businesses do have those, but I think it's what the people are, are people doing what they said they would do, and are people acting in the right way? And now when we employ people, for me especially, 50% of it is behaviors and culture, and 50% of it is can they do the job. I'm more interested in working with people who can mold into our way of working, because you can teach skills to anyone, but have they got the right behaviors in our business? So that's what we're doing as a business, and that's how we're trying to integrate mental health into our business and our industry generally. For me, it seems to be working pretty well.
That's fantastic. Thanks, John. Coming to you, Megan, now, are there sort of some themes, topics, other types of sort of wellbeing support that are kind of most effective within your organisation, within the NHS?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, sorry. I would say this one's a bit of a moving target, because there's just no concrete world that exists outside our doorsteps anymore. And people are honestly really struggling with uncertainty. Some are becoming apathetic, scared, angry, suspicious. So we're really ever looking for some solid ground to stand on. And we just don't have answers to a lot of things. So in terms of wellbeing support within the NHS, or really any organization, it's looking at ways to help support employees who are experiencing ongoing stress through ways that work for them, both individually and communally. So it's looking at providing them with context into their lives to see things that are fixed and that they can actually control. So right now, I find putting well-being into day-to-day needs to be done more creatively, in a way that's approachable and sometimes less direct. Because even as John mentioned earlier, there's industries that are really actively working to reduce stigma around these conversations, but that still does exist. So sometimes when you approach things from a very mental health first place, it can be less approachable. So one of the most effective ways that I would say to impart well-being, which I think everyone here has shared, is modeling. If those at the top model well behavior, boundaries, self-care, and beyond, those around them will feel safe to do the same. And honestly, bar none, that's the thing that we have seen is the most effective. So more indirect ways of accessing mental well-being programming can be done through events that promote different types of stress relief through movement, laughter, or shared experiences. Rosie mentioned creating communities, and this is spot on, because it's a period of grief that we've gone through. And when we grieve individually, we don't complete that grief, we stick in it. And when we grieve communally, we come out of it, and it becomes a shared experience that allows us to come together and better have those conversations that Marcus and John are talking about, where we can share how we're doing. And I think this is really true of the frontline staff who have gone through a lot of things that have been really intense, and they've felt a bit as though they were living in a silo because they've missed those little passing conversations where they would be able to share that experience with someone who fundamentally understood it. And it's equally important to touch base regularly through those little conversations that perhaps have nothing to do with work specifically, because it'll allow those communities to grow some depth organically. And it can also be done through group work and community development that is work specific. And that's through co-production and multidisciplinary work. One other thing that we found is people have kind of lost their purpose when they're apart from each other. So we forget what we're doing and what the bigger picture is. And when we come together and we co-produce, it helps to really build existing relationships among teams, industries, and organizations. And it helps people to show the impact of their work beyond themselves and share the experience that they've had with individuals who are doing the same thing day to day, putting our brains together for something bigger. So I think there's a lot of little ways that we can really share and grow well-being day to day that are specific to the NHS and frontline workers, but really within every industry moving forward.
Well, yeah, that's fascinating. And I think this is actually a good point to come to that question that was asked by one of the audience. So Rosie, I'm going to come to you now to ask, so the question was, we have gone to a hybrid workforce, as have many who are on this webinar, and some are choosing to be fully remote. So how do you keep those employees engaged and keep everyone connected when people are remote?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge, and it's a question that we're asking ourselves every day at the moment, because a lot of people we've now hired, excuse me, are on a fully remote contract, so they're not even expected to come into the office anymore, which is great in terms of flexibility, but then that question remains of how do you keep people connected in a hybrid model when some are coming in and some aren't. You don't want to give preferential treatment or feel like others are more visible, etc. So what we've been trying to do anyway for the last couple of months is build those online communities. So we have very active ERGs within the business, and so they've gathered together, they have weekly meetings, and those provide an opportunity for people to interact with others who they don't directly work with, which is, I think, is what's really missing about working in a hybrid or remote working world. You don't bump into people in the corridors or at the water cooler and things like that. So the ERGs are a really nice one, but other ones are groups that we've set up around interests. So we have a lot of gamers at the business, and so we've set up a social group for people to come together and talk about games that they're doing. They now do online games together in their spare time, which is really nice. So just tapping into what the interests of your people are and making sure that they feel able to get together around those interests. And sometimes it's as obvious as sport, you know, set up a local football league for your office so that people can get together that way. Another digital one that we're doing is making sure that there are Teams groups for each location so that people can share stuff. For example, we have one for our Hammersmith office where someone's going to a gig next week and he shared tickets of that on the group. And it's that just social interaction, and people are now joking about what rock bands they like and things like that. The sort of the everyday experiences that you wouldn't think are important, but bring a huge amount of value and camaraderie that you would get naturally in the office. So we've been looking at building those out a lot, and we're looking at a sort of coffee catch up thing at the moment, which we haven't launched yet, but which will automatically pair people up on a weekly or a monthly basis, and it will put a calendar invite into their diaries to catch up and meet more people in the business. So we are quite seriously looking at infrastructure as well to make sure that people interact socially and have that community and a sense of connection and belonging.
Some lovely ideas there. Thank you, Rosie. So moving, we are running out of time swiftly. It goes fast, doesn't it? Coming back to you briefly, Megan, are there any sort of particular groups of people or employees that we need to specifically sort of look out for at this time, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that we've been asked a lot. And I think the honest answer is I think we need to look out for everyone. The truth is what we've seen is everyone's struggling in their own way. And while we know that people who care for others as a part of their job are often the least likely to care for themselves, like nurses or, frontline staff, it's everyone that needs to be looked out for. HR employees have gone through layoffs and onboarding new employees. Sales staff have had to work through years of uncertainty with so many markets. People in roles that have flourished have really had an excessive amount of work that maybe they're less used to. Everybody's struggling in their own way, you know. And I think that the one thing that may be a misstep that we've had as we look at that Gallup poll and we find ourselves surprised that this has been ongoing is that we have been looking at the people that are maybe most stereotypically the ones that we've looked at where we all struggle. And that's where it goes back to those small conversations that we've all been talking about. So I think that I would be remiss in saying that there's one population that needs to be looked out for more than others. And I think the reality is as John said, get to know people in a way that you may not otherwise have before by asking little questions, and be on the lookout for everyone, including yourself.
Lovely. And I'm going to come to you, Marcus, because I know you've got a thought on this, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, firstly, I totally agree with Megan. I think, mental health doesn't discriminate. So we need to be looking at everybody and making sure that we're supporting them in the right way. But a thought that I had is that as more businesses look towards building teams of mental health first aiders, I think it's really important that these people are supported, and you really look to support the supporters, because whilst it's called first aid, it's not as straightforward as knowing where the first aid kit is or finding some plasters. And now that's not to diminish the important role that first aid plays in an organisation, but as a mental health first aider, you're potentially going to be in a position where you're assisting someone in psychosis, or potentially having a conversation with someone who has an eating disorder and helping them get take the first steps to getting the help they need. So it carries a responsibility that shouldn't be underestimated. So I think it's really important that those people who have put themselves forward to be those mental health first aiders, to be that front line of people who are going to be helping the workforce find the support and tools they need. I think it's critical that they get the support.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. So I do have a couple of other questions that have come through from the audience, but before I come to those, just like to go around the panel and ask for some sort of final thoughts as to kind of what advice do you have for HR managers and business leaders out there listening to this webinar, who are perhaps in the midst of planning their wellbeing strategies for next year. Are there any quick wins? What are the basics they should be getting in place? Where should they start? So coming first to you, Rosie.
I think just listening, it sounds really obvious, but just making sure that you're listening to what people need and the feedback that they're giving you. It's all very well building up as an employer or an HR professional, building up a wellbeing resource and packs, but if it's not actually targeted or tailored to what your people need, it's not going to have the right impact. So I think listening, making sure that you're getting that information and listening to what your people need. Thank you. John?
I think for me, listening, obviously, as Rosie says, is really important. But for me, I think it's important that people realise it's a shared endeavour. You can't have people around the business who are effectively sponges, soaking up all this sort of, all this massive stuff that you're getting from people in terms of their mental health. And then just, what does that person do when they receive that information? Where do they offload that? So I think, whilst you may train up mental health first aiders, and that's really important, and Marcus has been really clear that the benefits to that, and also the challenges of that as well, where do those people go in the business to help? And I kind of mentioned a couple of things that we do as a business to help with that. So that would be that. And I would say just normalizing it. Marcus said, where the first aid kit is, the green box in the kitchen kind of thing, but, let's make that being as obvious as what mental health is in a business. You just make it normal, and the minute you make it normal, you take the stigma away, people will just open up, and I think they flourish with it. But they're my sort of final thoughts, really. Thank you. Marcus, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, firstly, I think it's been incredibly reassuring to hear how, Rosie and John, for example, talking about their organizations and the steps that they're taking, which is brilliant to hear. But, focusing on mental health and well-being shouldn't just be reserved for calendar moments. It's something that should be communicated and nurtured all year round. And I think it's important as a business maybe to do some self-reflection. Ask yourself the questions, how are our workforce doing at the moment? Are we even measuring their well-being? Have we seen an increase in employees needing time off? How might we need to change as an organization to create an environment where our people can thrive? So I think, be prepared to ask yourself difficult questions, because from that will come the best answers for you and your employees.
Lovely. And finally, Megan, from your perspective, any quick wins, any advice?
I mean, I think there's never a quick win with mental health, but I think that as I looked at this question, the two things that really stood out for me are modeling, which has come up a lot, but start at the top, because if you're practicing what you preach, then others will feel safe to do the same. And that goes back to John saying normalizing it. And then I think, Marcus touched on, this is not something that we reserve for one day a year or 1 month a year. It's an ongoing working progress related thing. So you have to pay attention to how your employees are doing on an ongoing basis. And that means that you have to ask the questions, and you have to continue to ask questions, assess and reassess, and adapt as you go, knowing that things will change and your employees will have different needs moving forward.
Thank you. A couple of the other questions that we've had, I think we have answered in the course of the session, but one final question, which I'm going to direct to you, John. What do line managers need to know in terms of spotting issues around mental health and well-being, and how can we ensure, if issues do arise with staff, that the problem isn't chucked over to HR to solve?
But most mental health is silent, isn't it? You can't really see it, and you might pick up in nuances on someone's behaviour. But I think once it gets to that point, things are getting pretty bad. It's about catching it early, right? And for me as a line manager, I just love having a great relationship with my team. You know, you spend more time with these people than you do your own, you know, wives and husbands. You know, so you should have a really good relationship with them, right? I should, as a line manager, my duty is to understand the people that report to me, but also the people that I have a day-to-day working relationship with. And you only get that from spending time with people. And whilst, you know, I think it was Marcus said about, you know, you can't diarise these things, where it can't be just a moment in the calendar, I think is what he said. I just think you might have one-to-ones and stuff at work, and that's important for development, but that's not the time to check in on mental health. It's a daily thing. It's a conversation. You know, I always say to him, how things at home, you know, how's the family, you know, what's happening, you know, what you're doing at the weekend, and just listening. And you know how often it is, you know, you might have a conversation and they've got their phone in their hand, haven't they? Oh yeah, well, yeah, brilliant, Sarah, whatever. Put the bloody phone down, look at someone in the eye, just have a conversation with them and actually listen and feedback their answer. And that's 5 minutes a day. It's nothing, is it? You know, so for me, I think it's pretty simple, as long as you make the time for people.
Absolutely. And I'll just come quickly, I'll go around the virtual panel. Marcus, anything more to add, having kind of listened to the discussion so far this morning? Anything that you feel that we haven't touched on that you wanted to?
No, I mean, I think it's been really comprehensive. And like I said not long ago, it's so reassuring to hear how organisations are setting themselves up from the start to be proactive in how they're helping people with their mental health, rather than it being a purely reactive exercise. I think, you know, setting that up from the start is really, really important. So I think it's really reassuring to hear what everyone's had to say. And, you know, just to echo my sentiments from earlier, you know, if you're struggling with your mental health at the moment and you're finding it difficult, please talk to someone. And, you know, it will hopefully start a process that will help you find treatment, solution, support for how you're managing your mental health at the moment. So be confident and brave in having those conversations, because that's how you can find the support you need.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, we are coming fast to the end, so I am going to quickly go around the panel and ask you your 3 wellbeing non-negotiables, we like to call these. So what are the 3 things that you prioritise to support and optimise your own wellbeing day to day? Megan, coming to you first.
So my 3 are family time where I'm present. So no phone, no nothing, just present. Movement of any form has to happen for me each day, and then some time given to reflection and reassessment.
Lovely. Rosie?
I have to get outside for at least 10 minutes each day, otherwise I start going stir crazy pretty quickly. And I have to have 1 social interaction a day at least. So that might be a phone call to a friend or to a colleague, but I make sure I have that time, otherwise I again start to notice that I miss it. And I try and read something interesting each day, whether that's for work or for personal.
John? Yeah,
so for me, actually, first one is the same as Rosie, social interaction, which is, for me, has got much easier now. I love coming into the office. I find I do my job a million times better by being around people. So that's been an easy one now that we're allowed back in. Exercise is really important to me. I think there's a fine balance with exercise. It doesn't become a pressure as well. I know one of your colleagues, Sean, would know sort of a lot about how big exercise is in that. And thirdly, I I actually quite like just being alone sometimes and not having anyone bother me, just to be myself, because it's when you're around people all the time, sometimes you forget about yourself a little bit. So kind of what Megan was saying about sort of that reflective moment is important to me.
Thank you. And finally, Marcus.
I want to take a slightly different approach to this, if possible, because when I had my first kind of break from work, I took time to establish some practices like meditation, gratitude journaling, being outside, trying to see my friends, and I found those things really help boost my mood. But life gets in the way sometimes. So the one thing I would prioritize above everything basically is being kind to yourself and compassionate to other people. I read a quote somewhere, and I can't attribute it to someone, unfortunately, but it's really stuck with me, which is you'll spend most of your life inside your head. So try and make it a nice place to be. And there are times when even our non-negotiables aren't possible. You know, I found great solace in exercise. It gives me so much energy. But 5 weeks ago, I fractured my wrist. And that meant one of the things that I do count on really to keep me stable and keep me happy is exercise. I couldn't do it. So I had to be pragmatic, and I had to think to myself, you know, I can't change this situation. I'll start again when I'm able to. So maybe I'll look at something else I can add to my life that can help fill that gap. So you know, like I said, there are times when those non-negotiables aren't going to be possible. So be kind to yourself and start again tomorrow.
I think that's a brilliant place to end. So thank you very, very much to you all, Marcus, John, Rosie, Megan. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy diaries to join us and this webinar. Thank you very much to the audience for joining. And yes, have a good rest of the day. Be well, be happy, be you. And if there are any questions and you do want to stay on, we will try to answer those. But otherwise, thank you and have a good day.